and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. The impeachment proceedings have begun. We'll talk about that for a little bit and then get into some other issues in the news. I'll probably repeat a little of this, maybe in more summary form next hour when we go on our national program and have all the radio stations actually pulling down this program. Before we talk with Vernon and Amber Burger, as we talk with them about His Voice Global. And then in the next hour, we'll have a chance to hear from Doug Bender, who'll be in studio. He's, of course, with I Am Second, and an individual that has co-authored a couple of these books. This one, I Choose Peace, which is really kind of his own story as well as the story of just kind of a who's who of individuals over the years that have actually been interviewed in that white chair for I Am Second. And then before the end of the next hour, Robert Morris will be with us briefly as we talk about his book, Take the Day Off, talk about this idea of sabbatical and a Sabbath rest and those kinds of things. So lots to cover, but let's get to this. And I thought I'd give you just an overview of what's going to unfold over the next couple of days and really weeks, because we heard yesterday from some of our Millennial Roundtable that they're hoping to have a vote on this before Christmas. And if they do, well, great, because I think a lot of us would want to get this over one way or the other. But the reality is, if you look at the interview schedule so far, it's going to take a while. If for no other reason than, as I have said on this program too many times before, every time you turn around, Congress is taking another recess. You know, don't you wish you had a job where you only worked really Tuesday through Thursday, you got a 4-day weekend all the time, and then there are recesses for election, recesses for Thanksgiving, recess for Christmas, recess for the summer, and on it goes. But today, already have had a chance to hear from William Taylor. William Taylor is one of the top envoys for Ukraine. I'm going to say more about what he said in just a minute, and then we'll be hearing from the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, George Kent. That's what's on tap for today. I'm not sure what happens tomorrow because I see nothing on the schedule, so I assume that they get a day to go do some other things, maybe pass some laws. I doubt it. But then on Friday, the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, will actually testify. And then you have to wait till next Tuesday, because, of course, we have to give them a long weekend. And then we will hear from Jennifer Williams, who has been an aide to the vice president. And so we'll see if that maybe even is a counter to some of the things that have been said. And on that same day, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, we've mentioned his name before with the National Security Council, and even Kurt Volker, who has been a special envoy to Ukraine. A week from today, then we'll hear from Gordon Sondland. He is actually an individual that has been the the U.S. ambassador to the European Union. I'm going to get that right there. Then Laura Cooper, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. David Hale, Undersecretary of State. And then next Thursday, Fiona Hill, former director for the National Security Council for Europe and Russia. And if that bores you, well, that, I think, gives you a pretty good idea of exactly what's been unfolding. Most of the fireworks happened before we heard the testimony, because I'm just reading from one particular article here, and there are many, but I'll just read this one, that as soon as the House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff began to speak, there were people saying he's already starting to lie. One of those was the boilerplate lie about the fact that Trump asked for a favor dealing with investigations on Biden. As this particular article reminds us, and you can check it for yourself. You don't have to accept my point or the point of this author. You can read the transcript because it is available. You can see that it's clearly not in the transcript, did not happen. The whole question of Biden, either Biden, whether it's Hunter Biden or Joe Biden, was not brought up until another page and a half later, and it certainly was not couched as a favor. So if you, and again, I think the original idea was the whistleblower and Adam Schiff and some of the others were hoping that there would not be a transcript so that you had to then trust what the whistleblower told you. You had to trust, indeed, as we'll talk about in just a minute, what William Taylor told you, because he was not on the phone call either, by the way. That's a point that somehow gets missed a lot of times, that you just have to trust their recollection of the phone call. And I think Donald Trump really kind of blocked a lot of that by simply saying, here's the transcript, read it for yourself. Now, you've had some people say, well, it's not a perfect transcript. There may have been something left out. Maybe. That's a possibility. Not a likely one, especially since almost everybody that has said this was not a quid pro quo or an extortion or bribery has been saying that. But very quickly thereafter, then you have the opening statement from Representative Devin Nunes, and he is the ranking minority member in the committee. This goes on for quite some time, so I'll just read part of it before the break, a little bit more later, talk about some of the testimony that came from William Taylor, then we're going to move on. But since this was kind of the first day, and since we have a little bit of time before I have my first guest, I thought I would indulge you a little bit. And like I said, if you find even some of the conversation I'm having with you right now as boring, that gives you a pretty good idea of what was being said, because a lot of it had to simply be, we disagreed with the decisions made by the president. Okay. He didn't listen to our policy pronouncements. All right. That sometimes happens. I'm sorry that maybe you, being more intelligent than in him, certainly should have been listened to or paid more attention to. But the bottom line is that's not a high crime, a misdemeanor, or certainly treason. But let's come back to Devin Nunes for just a minute, because he wanted to try to set some of this in context. And so let me set that in context, and then we'll talk about this actual testimony, because he said that there was a hope that the Mueller report would actually give grounds for impeachment. And so after the testimony on July 24th, and I never saw the correlation between those dates, after the testimony on July 24th, that created Nothing Burger. There was nothing that came from that. That phone call, which was the next day, and I never really put that together, July 25th. Then he says, then all of a sudden Democrats turned on a dime and now claim the real malfeasance is not a Russian hoax or that the president was a Russian agent, but the real malfeasance has to do with Ukraine. And so he said very quickly, and I'll just cover these 5 points real quickly before we take a break. In the blink of an eye, we're exposed to forget about Democrats on this committee falsely claiming that they had more than circumstantial evidence of a collusion between President Trump and the Russians. Number two, we're asked to simply forget about all the reading of the fabrication of the Trump-Russia collusion from the Steele dossier, which has turned out to be phony, of course. We're expected to forget about them trying to obtain nude pictures of Trump from Russian pranksters. You may have heard about that on Sean Hannity and other programs. We really never covered it here. Number four, we're supposed to forget about them leaking a false story to the CNN. And then number five, we're supposed to forget about the countless other deceptions, large and small, that make them the last people on the earth with the credibility to hurl more preposterous accusations at their political opponents. So anyway, he does want to put that in context. And I never really thought about the fact that after the Mueller testimony on July 24th kind of blew up in everybody's faces, it obviously didn't already blew up before when you saw the report. Then the next day was July 25th, and somebody said, oh, well, then we'll try this phone call that took place really 24 hours later, and we're going to then no longer talk Russia. We're going to talk about Ukraine. And that's where we find ourselves now. We'll talk more about that testimony right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In a normal world, it would be newsworthy when the Attorney General of the United States gives an impassioned speech about religious liberty. But we don't live in that world, so the speech by William Barr has either been ignored or ridiculed. When he spoke at Notre Dame, he reminded the audience that the founders of this country had a supreme test as a free society. The test was whether the citizens in such a free society could maintain the moral discipline and virtue necessary for the survival of free institutions. He explained that failing that test would lead to one of two tyrannies. The citizens would either embark on an unbridled pursuit of personal appetites at the expense of common good, or else coercive government would step in to impose restraints. He then asked, what is the source of virtue and moral discipline that is necessary for self-government? Then he answered, it is religion. Religion helps teach, train, and habituate people to what is good. This comes in various forms, from formal religious training to informal rules like customs and traditions. That is the problem. Religion is not popular in our secular culture. In fact, it is very unpopular. Those who defy the secular creed of our day risk a figurative burning at the stake, social, educational, professional ostracism, and exclusion waged through the lawsuits and savage media campaigns. Each week on my radio program, we provide an ever-growing list of examples of hostility to religion, religious values, and religious people. Bakers, florists, printers, videographers, photographers, teachers, and students experience criticism and persecution. Now more than ever, we need to make the case for the positive value of religion in general and Christianity in particular in our society. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just talk a little bit longer about this issue of impeachment. I'm going to move on to some other topics, some of which are examples of what would be discussed if we weren't talking about this issue of impeachment. I'm going to talk about the new district attorney in San Francisco and how, in some respects, that is pushing not only places like San Francisco, but Seattle and Austin and other places into even more difficulty, and that's just an illustration of that. If you are not aware of the fact, there was an individual that actually pled guilty to actually being an al-Qaeda operative and wanting to blow people up. This one, of course, takes place in Cleveland, Ohio. But again, this is a national program, and you can recognize again that just as we talked about just a few weeks ago on this program, that with the killing of the leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and interesting enough, they appointed a successor, and he got killed as well. I'm going to be talking about this tonight. As a matter of fact, at Prestonwood Baptist Church, they asked me to speak on Islam this week and Hinduism next week, and I will be talking about just how you can witness to your Muslim friends and neighbors, but I'm also going to get into the whole question of if this were done by any other president other than Donald Trump, we would be talking about how taking out the leader of ISIS and also a long time ago taking out the leader of al-Qaeda have been so demoralizing to the radical Muslims. So anyway, we'll get to some of that in just a few minutes, but let me come back to Devin Nunes. I don't know him. I don't know if we've ever interviewed him on the program, but reading between the lines, I think he believes that there may not even be a vote on impeachment, that all of this is what he calls in this particular opening statement a carefully orchestrated media smear campaign. In other words, they certainly, if they've counted heads, know that they're not going to get 67 members of the United States Senate to remove Donald Trump from office. if they've even started counting heads in the House, there may not be enough even Democrats to vote for articles of impeachment. So this may be just sort of a highly orchestrated smear campaign, but he makes the case for why he thinks it may be, because he points out something we have talked about before. He says, quote, after vowing publicly that impeachment requires bipartisan support, Democrats are pushing impeachment forward without the backing of a single House Republican. Now, the case you'd have to make then is that every one of those Republicans is beholden to Donald Trump. And that's really hard to even think about for a moment, because there are a number of Republicans that have always referred to themselves as never Trumpers, but they don't see that this investigation is going to go anywhere. The next point, he says, witnesses deemed suitable for television by the Democrats were put through a closed-door audition process in a cult-like atmosphere in the basement of the Capitol. And he goes through and makes some comments about that. Number 3, he says, violating their own guidelines, the Democrats repeatedly redacted from the transcripts the name of Alexandra Chalupa, who actually is a contractor for the Democratic National Committee, who worked with the Ukrainian officials to actually try to collect dirt on Donald Trump during the Trump campaign. And so they keep removing all of that. His fourth point, I think, is that Democrats rejected most of the Republican witness requests. I'll give you that list in just a minute in case you've never seen it before, because it is more than just Hunter Biden and the whistleblower. It's a couple of other individuals that have just been scratched off the list because if the Democrats don't want those people to testify, then they won't testify. Then, of course, another one, the whistleblower has acknowledged to have a bias against President Trump, and his attorney, as we talked about just the other day, touted a coup against the president just weeks after his election. And then finally, at a prior hearing, Democrats on the committee read out a purely fictitious rendition of President's phone call with President Zelensky. Of course, he's referring there to Adam Schiff. So those are all very important issues. And so he talks about the fact a little bit later in his opening testimony that for years Democrats have accused the Trump campaign of colluding with Russia when they themselves were colluding with Russia by funding and spreading the Steele dossier. And they now accuse President Trump of malfeasance in Ukraine when they themselves were culpable. Democrats cooperated in a Ukrainian election meddling, and they defend Hunter Biden's securing of a lavish paid position with a corrupt Ukrainian company, all while the president served as vice president. So after all of that, it was interesting that Devin Nunes then welcomed to the committee Ambassador Taylor and Mr. Kent. And he said, Ambassador Taylor and Mr. Kent, I would like to welcome you here and congratulate you for passing the Democrats' Star Chamber auditions held in the last 6 weeks in the basement of the Capitol. It seems you agreed wittingly or unwittingly to participate in a drama, but the main performance, the Russian hoax, has ended, and you've been cast in a low-rent Ukrainian sequel. So that's how that conversation went. And so it does bring us to the testimony we've heard so far from William Taylor. He is, of course, one of the top diplomats in Ukraine. He made a very powerful case for the fact that we do need to be involved in Ukraine. Ukraine has been fighting Russian troops. Even last week he was there when one Ukrainian soldier was killed and others were wounded, and that we should not withhold aid. Okay, you could already make the argument that that aid actually was withheld for quite a while under the Obama administration. It was temporarily held by the Trump administration, but nobody doubts that military aid has actually flowed to Ukraine. So a lot of his comment has to do with the fact that we told the president this, and he didn't listen. We told the president he should do this, and he seemed distracted. Matter of fact, one of the points he makes, and this will actually surface next week when we have that comment from one of those individuals who actually will be on Sodland, is that he maybe seemed more distracted by the investigation than by Ukraine, which sort of makes some sense. If indeed you have this Mueller investigation going on for 2 years, it probably would be kind of distracting. I think if you had interviewed Bill Clinton when there was the investigation of his impeachment and then asked him how focused he was on Osama bin Laden, I think a lot of people would say he seems a lot more focused on the impeachment hearing than even what's happening in foreign policy. So I think it's a fair comment. It's not impeachable, but it's probably an accurate comment that this president, we've all acknowledged sometimes, seems to almost have ADD. He jumps around from this and that. If you've ever heard him speak, one thing reminds him of something else, and it's kind of hard to keep a train of thought, and that really doesn't surprise me. But again, if that's the high crime and misdemeanor, I don't think we have one of those. And again, one of the memos that's come out, and so now that it's been published, we have access to it. And this is a memo that was sent by the Republicans to other Republicans on the Intelligence Committee. It's 18 pages, but it can be summarized in really about 3 or 4 points. Number one, the July 25th call is the one we have. The summary, which is the best evidence we have of the conversation, whether you want to call it a transcript or a summary, it shows no conditional evidence or evidence of pressure. Number two, President Zelensky, President Trump have both said there was no pressure on the call. So unless you want to hold to Zelensky fearful of going against Trump and losing military aid, you have to say that the listener and the speaker both did not say that there was pressure on that call. Number three, the Ukrainian government was not aware that there was even a hold on U.S. security assistance when that July 25th call took place. And then, of course, finally, this one's kind of an obvious one, when President Trump met with President Zelensky in September of this year, of course, funds had already been flowing. And so, again, if this was a quid pro quo or an extortion or bribery, really hard to find it. Very good piece that maybe later on we might read if indeed there is time. If not, I'll work with it on certainly Friday's weekend edition. But, of course, we've learned a little bit more now about William Taylor, who, by the way, was not on the call. We're going to learn a little bit more about another couple of individuals as well. And I mentioned this individual by the name of Sondland. We'll certainly hear more from Gordon Sondland, who, interestingly enough, did not characterize what Bill Taylor or William Taylor said it was incorrect to see that was withholding evidence. So next week, there may be a real counter to even some of the things said today by William Taylor. And then, of course, the whole issue of various individuals that have been asked to be called as witnesses. Here's the short list from Jim Jordan, who now sits on the committee: Devin Archer, Hunter Biden, Alexandra Chalupa, we just mentioned her name a minute ago, David Hale, Tim Morrison, Nellie Orr, that would be interesting, Ambassador Volker, and the whistleblower and their sources. And except for maybe Volker, I see no one else on the list. So Republicans have put forward a variety of names, and so far, none of them are scheduled to testify. And that might tell you a great deal about where this particular hearing is going. That's all for the impeachment. Each day we'll talk about it a little bit, but I probably took enough time here to bore all of you, and I'm just trying to keep you from having to watch what has so far been a pretty boring set of testimony, and that happening today, first from William Taylor, now from George Kent. Let's take a break. We'll get into some other issues in the news right after this.
When you gift a point of view, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dies would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kerby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penn Dexter and Kerby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let's get into a couple of other issues. These are the kind of things and stories that might have been covered if we didn't have all of the focus on impeachment. And I'm not minimizing that, but I recognize that there are some other things to consider. And one of those is the story about a man in Ohio who did plead guilty to plotting an Al-Qaeda attack. And the reason that we don't hear about this so often is because in some respects, we are so far removed from 9/11 that we're sort of in a pre-9/11 mindset. Number two, if you talk too much about even the possibility of a terrorist attack, then that sort of gives credence to some of the actions that have been taken by the Trump administration. And you can see why certain people in the media might not want to cover that as well. And so this is a good example of a story that in some respects shows a bias because it never really got covered. But I do want to thank those at the Western Journal to pull it out. I'll just read parts of it here because it's scary, because in this particular case, it illustrates another real challenge in this war on terror, and that is the so-called homegrown terrorist. Even when he was heading up the FBI, James Comey, who's been in the news for a lot of other reasons, pointed out the fact that there could be a lone wolf homegrown terrorist. Some of the terrorist actions that have taken place in this country, and in this case, this was thwarted, so no loss of life at all. But some of those are harder to catch because people can become radicalized right there on their computer, and so that is the case. His American name was Nathaniel Pitts, but of course he took on the Arabic name Abdu Rahim Rafij, and of course that is what he was hoping to do. And he was attempting to support al-Qaeda in an attack against the United States. He will be sentenced in February, but he's already pled guilty. And he was arrested back in July after telling an undercover FBI agent that he was going to launch an attack in downtown Cleveland. According to some of the press release, he said things like, "I'm trying to figure out something that would shake them up on the 4th of July. What would hit them at their core? Well, have a bomb blow up on the 4th of July parade." Can you imagine what that would have been like on the 4th of July? He was looking at Voinovich Park in Cleveland, and also he was looking at maybe planting a bomb in the Coast Guard station at Lake Erie. And so anyway, he said, I'm going to be downtown when the thing goes off. I'm going to be there because I want to see it go off. And that's so typical of some of these kinds of bomb attacks. Remember the Boston Marathon, if you might remember those two individuals there. Then when he was told by the individual who, and it's amazing, these people sometimes are not the sharpest knife in the drawer. They're giving all this information to an undercover FBI agent, but not realizing that. But when told that there would be civilian casualties, according to the press release, he said, "I don't care. I have no regrets. I'd be able to go to sleep." And so the Justice Department affidavit, which has been filed against him, is one that is certainly the case. And again, one of his other statements was, "We as Muslims need to start training like this every day. We need to need to know how to shoot guns, throw hand grenades, hand-to-hand combat, how to survey out in the woods, look at the bed blue-eyed devils. They teach their little dogs on how to shoot and hunt. If you fear death, then don't say you love Islam." And so he was maybe a little unbalanced there as well, but nevertheless went on to say that I'm not scared to do this. That's how I would send. I take that back. This is the part where he talks about as a Muslim, he would want to make sure that he cut off the heads and hands of any of his enemies. And so that's where he said, this is how I would send Donald Trump back, head, hand in hand, and like this. In other words, he was hoping that if you could ever get close to Donald Trump, not happening, of course, he would cut off his head, cut off his hands. And this is the kind of person that needs to go to jail. Now they're talking about the fact that he would only serve 14 years, although that's a long time, but he could eventually get out. And let's hope that he doesn't get further radicalized in the prisons by some of the Muslim imams. But nevertheless, one more real quickly, just to give you the point of how dangerous some of these people can be. This is another statement he made. We must kill all the kafirins. Those are what is known as the disbelievers. These are the individuals that reject Islam. We need to kill them, destroy them, annihilate them. Look at our Muslim brothers and sisters being slaughtered each and every day by the kafirins, the unbelievers, and the armies. They boast about that. Everywhere we go, we get treated wrong. It's time that we change this. They kill one of us, we kill 10,000 of them. They kill two of us, we kill the whole city. Forget this pity pack love stuff. And there's some other things about decapitating and some other things. And any of you are eating lunch right now, I don't even want to read that. But here's just a good example of something that probably will never get covered by the press. And even when he's sentenced, I guess sentencing doesn't take place till February. Why, I don't know. But nevertheless, that will be the case. And supposedly he's facing 14 years in prison, then would have supervised release after that for the rest of his life. So we'll see how dangerous he is. But it's just an example of a story that just doesn't get any coverage, but it got some coverage right here. Here's a story that I wasn't going to cover, but then, first of all, I heard that Mike Gallagher talked about it. I'd seen the article about it, and then our friends at the Wall Street Journal wrote an editorial about it. So I thought maybe it would be worthwhile as well, because it gives you an idea that as some of these, especially progressive cities, are getting worse and worse and worse, you would think that sometime there would be a common sense to say, you know what, maybe we need to reverse course. But the newly elected district attorney for the city of San Francisco has already proclaimed that he has told those people in the police force that they will no longer actually cite somebody for public urination. Okay, well, I'd heard that one before, but the story is a lot worse than you might imagine. The editors put it this way: the deterioration of the city by the Bay has been tragic to watch. From the Tenderloin to the Mid-Market to the Mission, open use of narcotics is commonplace. Homeless encampments dominate public spaces. Human feces dot the sidewalks. The middle class are fleeing, punishing housing costs and neighborhoods and all the rest. But as they point out in the second paragraph, last week, San Francisco voters said, more, please. Weekend ballot counts cinched the election of the far-left public defender Chesa Boudin as the district attorney. Now, he's been referred to as a progressive prosecutor. As you'll find out in just a minute, he is really progressive. He is about as left-wing as you can imagine, because he is an individual who has, as some people say, a remarkable biography. His parents were members of the left-wing terrorist group Weather Underground. They were the ones who were actually imprisoned for felony murder as they actually gunned down 2 police officers and a security guard. So while they're in prison, guess who raises him? That's William Ayers and Bernadette Dorn, the friends of Barack Obama. And so the resume this man has is something. Now, again, I love our people at the Wall Street Journal. They said, Mr. Boudin says he shouldn't be judged by his parents' action. True. Just because your parents were part of the Weather Underground, just because you were raised by other terrorists at that time, doesn't necessarily mean you're a terrorist. So then they went on to say, yes, but he made their incarceration a centerpiece of his campaign. They also go on to say he rarely, if ever, expressed sympathy for the murdered officers, and, matter of fact, has made the San Francisco police force a major target of his campaign. At his election party last week, supporters erupted in profane chants about the Police Officers Association. And I might just mention, again, you know a little bit about his sympathies, because when he graduated from college, where did he go? He went to Venezuela and worked for Hugo Chavez. Now, if this guy likes socialism, he likes it so much that he moved to Venezuela to actually work for Hugo Chavez, and actually wrote an article supporting the idea of Hugo Chavez eliminating term limits. And so now he has said that he is going to go after the so-called corporate landlords, because he's saying the reason we have homeless is because some of these people have been evicted. So he's going to deal with that. He is, if anything, going to make sure that we decriminalize almost any action by the homeless people in San Francisco. And I'm starting to see more and more people say, I'm not even sure I want to go into the city by the bay, this beautiful city of San Francisco, which is turned into a place where you find drug needles and all sorts of things on the ground, and you have to step over them if you even go to those parts of the town. And more people are obtaining those maps so that they know which parts of San Francisco to make sure that they avoid. And the new district attorney, he is asking for more of the same. That's what happened in San Francisco. Many people think the same kinds of things are going to happen in Seattle, Portland, even Austin, Texas. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention tomorrow, the next hour, Vernon and Amber Burger will be with us, and then we'll have Doug Bender with I Am Second and Robert Morris. Might just mention that tomorrow we'll also be getting into some very important issues as well. So I'll give you kind of a program note every single day so that you have a pretty good understanding of that. And on our Friday weekend edition, of course, we'll have Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews, and we'll kind of get a look back at some of the things that have happened over the last couple of days on the impeachment hearings, because we, of course, today heard William Taylor, now hearing George Kent, and on Friday we'll also hear from the ambassador to Ukraine, at least the former ambassador, Marie Yankonovich, and so we'll see where that takes us by Friday, and then, of course, look forward to some of the other testimony taking place next week. Just before I get into one other issue I thought I'd put on the table, let me just mention that my Viewpoints commentary today is about this speech given by the Attorney General, William Barr. I wasn't originally going to talk about this, but after a week of either seeing the mainstream media ignoring his speech or having a few of the individuals that do mention it use just inflammatory comments and unfair comments about it, I thought it might be worthwhile to point out that when he gave a speech on religious liberty at Notre Dame, it was really very powerful, because as you go to the website that we have on that, and of course you can even go and find the original speech if you like, he points out that there is really a need for religion if we're going to keep a society together, because in some respects he even talks about how the founders said that the real test for a republic like we have is whether the citizens in a free society could maintain moral discipline and virtue, because that's necessary for a free institution. And if you don't have religion, then you end up with usually one of two tyrannies. The first is the tyranny of, if you will, the everyone doing what is right in their own eyes, the tyranny, if you will, of what he called unbridled pursuit of personal appetites at the expense of common good. Everybody doing their own thing, but that doesn't work very well, because sooner or later somebody's thing gets in the way of your thing, and we've got to bring some kind of order, which leads to the other obvious tyranny that eventually develops, and that is coercive government to restrain all that kind of behavior. And in either case, you don't want anarchy, and you don't want this overreaching totalitarian government, because a republic like ours works best when you have self-government. We recognize there's human sinfulness, so we recognize even good people can do wrong. But if you don't have a lot of people doing good things, then you really have a problem. And as he points out, religion helps to teach and train and habituate people to what is good. And as I've said before, we live in a world right now where not only do we not think religion is helpful, we actually think it might be hurtful. And I talk about in second to last paragraph how we've seen all sorts of individuals, bakers, florists, printers, videographers, photographers, teachers, students, actually being criticized for wanting to express their religious liberties. So it's a very powerful argument. It is well written. It was well received in Notre Dame, but it was either ignored or ridiculed by the mainstream press. So again, I encourage you to go to our website, pointofview.net, print it out. But even more so, if you don't already receive my Viewpoints commentary on a regular basis, there's a place for you to sign up. I just saw Penna Dexter's commentary, which we'll be talking about on Friday, and that one would land in your inbox on Saturday, dealing with Common Core. So these are just really good resources, very free, very easy to use, easy to then click and put on your Facebook page, Twitter feed, send to somebody. And so let me encourage you to take advantage of that as well. But just before we wind down this hour, I thought I would also read from our friend Robert Knight. I love having him on, but sometimes it's just about as easy to quote some of his columns to point out that back in 2010, after the Democrats really lost control of the House of Representatives, and then in 2014, when the House not only was lost, but the Senate was as well, you had this shellacking that took place on the part of Republicans against Democrats. And yet in the midst of that, President Barack Obama made it clear that he was not going to move to the middle at all. As a matter of fact, he said everyone in this White House is going to say, look, all right, what we need to do is do things differently. But he said, my principles that we're fighting for, the things that motivate me every day and motivate my staff every day, these things aren't going to change. And at the time, the Washington Post reporter, Karen Tumulty, observed that he did not speak of trying to find middle ground on areas of fundamental disagreement. So that was her reporting, if you will, on how, indeed, the sitting president at that time, Barack Obama, responded to first the loss in 2010 and then even the greater loss in 2014. But he still said, I'm not going to compromise. We're not going to try to find middle ground. We're going to still stand by our principles. Well, now, of course, as you well know, this election last week has caused some consternation because you had Democrats controlling now both houses of the Virginia legislature, and they also won a couple of other elections. Of course, they lost some of the others, but nevertheless, now all of a sudden, this writer for the Washington Post, Karen Tumulty, insists that Republicans need to look and sound more like Democrats if they know what's good for them. And so she's basically saying that even though Barack Obama and the Democrats in 2010 and 2014 didn't try to find middle ground, but simply stood by their principles, the Republicans should do just the opposite. And her line in her column the other day is, Republicans would do well to consider it a reminder that when the tide is rising, it's a good idea to quit swimming against it. So again, the argument is better to sink and drown and abandon your base. And so I thought it was interesting. There was also an editorial in the Washington Post that also told Republicans to reverse course and tack to the center. So it has been kind of interesting to see that it is the height of political courage for Democrats and even for President Barack Obama to stick to his principles, which I applaud him and the party for doing so because people vote for you and your party for those principles. It was courageous for them to do so. But now we have columnists for the Washington Post and even the editorial page of the Washington Post saying that it's stupid and it is foolhardy for Republicans to stand for those principles as well. So we'll see where that goes. But if nothing else, I certainly appreciate Robert Knight reminding us of that interesting contradiction. And he says if the Republicans want to win in 2020, the party needs to boldly champion its values and its strengths, such as a roaring economy and a measure of sanity, because he's, of course, alluding to some of these other ideas and arguments being put forth right now, like Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, and trying to figure out a way how to spend trillions and trillions of dollars we don't have by promising that you would not increase the taxes of the middle class. But I think we responded to some of that, at least accurately, yesterday. So if nothing else, just wanted to mention that particular piece. And Robert Knight was wise enough to go back and find how it is so interesting that if indeed a columnist agrees with a particular viewpoint, he, or in this case she, says they are courageous for holding on to their principles. But if they disagree, they're going to give you advice, and that is, if you really want to deal with a tide that is rising, you better stop trying to swim against it. So we'll see where this goes, but if nothing else, it might be words to the wise to some of those Republicans running, that maybe you should run on your strengths, talk about your values, and talk about some of the almost insanity that is being put forward by some of your opponents. And if you do that, hopefully fair-minded people will make wise decisions. But when we come back from the break, we're going to be talking with Vernon and Amber Burger about His Voice Global. A little bit later, we'll be talking with Doug Bender about I Am Second, and Robert Morris about his book, Take the Day Off, about a sabbatical rest. We've got a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. Of course, we have the first day of the impeachment hearings. We'll talk about that for a little bit, and then we'll get into some of the interviews we also have scheduled. We'll be talking in just a few minutes with Vernon and Amber Burger with His Voice Global. We'll talk about that outreach and how you can be involved with that. In studio with us next hour will be Doug Bender, who is the author of the book I Choose Peace. He's with I Am Second and has written a number of the I Am Second books, so we'll be talking about that with him, getting his testimony as well as the testimony of some of the individuals over these years that we've had a chance to interview on this program who have given their testimony with I Am Second. And then we'll end the next hour with Robert Morris, who is the senior pastor of Gateway Church, and we'll be talking about his book, Take the Day Off, which talks about kind of the idea of a sabbatical rest and those kinds of things. So there will be lots of things to cover in the next couple of hours. And today, of course, the beginning of the public testimony on impeachment. The impeachment calendar so far has William Taylor, who has already testified. I'll talk more about him in just a minute. U.S. envoy to Ukraine. And then, of course, right now, George Kent, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, testifying. On Friday, when we have our weekend edition, we'll maybe talk about some of the testimony that will come from the former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. And then next week, there will be testimony Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday as well from a variety of different individuals, ranging from Jennifer Williams, who's an aide to the Vice President, to Alexander Vidman, who we've talked about as well, Kurt Volker, and a variety of others. So that gives you a little bit of an idea. There was a little bit of fireworks today because of some of the back and forth taking place already with some of the people that have given their testimony, and even the way in which some of that was actually introduced at the time. So certainly we'll get into that a little bit later. But I might just mention that William Taylor, who has been kind of the top U.S. diplomat to Ukraine, spent some time, first of all, talking about the fact that he had heard about this. He actually was not on the phone call, but expressed his concern that we should, as a country, support Ukraine. Had been there when Ukraine soldiers have been fighting Russia. One was killed, another injured, and believed that we should not withhold any kind of military aid to them, and so makes that case. But at the same time, the case that he was making is that this was maybe an attempt to withhold security assistance because of a political campaign. But somebody that will be testifying next week actually had said to him in a text that his characterization was incorrect. So again, we're going to hear some of this testimony, but recognize that it's not over till it is over. And one of the kind of key verses I've used more than once is Proverbs 18, verse 17, because the testimony of a man may seem sound until another person has a chance to cross-examine him. And the information being sent out right now to those of the Republicans in the committee, which has now been released, shows that their argument is going to be simply that the summary or the transcript, whatever you want to call it, of the July 25th conversation shows that nothing was conditional and there was no evidence of pressure. Then they point to the fact that both President Donald Trump and President Zelensky have both said there was no pressure on the phone call. Number 3, that the Ukrainian government at that time on July 25th was not even aware that there might have been a hold on U.S. security assistance. And more importantly, as the two presidents got together, that would be President Trump and President Zelensky, U.S. aid had already begun flowing to them without any kind of quid pro quo, although now some are starting to use phrases like a bribery or extortion. So that's just a brief look at some of the things that have transpired today. We'll continue to look at those, may even get to those a little bit later this hour. But I wanted to feature an organization that you might want to know more about, and it's entitled His Voice Global, which is an outreach to various countries in Africa that have had a great outreach. And so we'll be talking about some of the partnerships in South Sudan, Kenya, and Uganda. Doug Bender is one of the Vernon Burger is one of the co-founders of this organization, as is his wife, Amber. And this is an organization that really has a great story about founding and establishing a church in southern Sudan. So Vernon and Amber, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's, if we can, tell your story. Vernon, maybe I'll start with you, because when people go to your website, and we do have a link on our website, pointofview.net, hisvoiceglobal.com, we can see all sorts of partnerships in various countries, but one of those stories happens in Sudan. Tell us more, if you might.
Yeah, so for me personally, I've been involved in what South Sudan now used to just be Sudan for right at 20 years. I came to know Jesus when I was 19. I wasn't raised really in much of a Christian background, but after I became a Christian, my first mentor just walked with me a lot, and he handed me a book called Through Gates of Splendor by Elizabeth Elliot. Her husband was martyred in 1956 in Ecuador, Jim Elliot. And he had me read that book, and for some reason, as I was reading it, I really believed that the Lord said, you're going to do something in Africa. And so I had no idea what that meant, because I didn't even at the time really know what it meant to hear from the Lord a lot. But then the next book I read was that he had me read was the biography of George Mueller, and a German that went to the UK, and he had a threefold goal. And number one was, how can I, number one goal is his life wanted to be one where he could ensure and be able to tell people that God still answered prayer today. Number two was that he had a pastoral heart. Number three, wanted to help as many orphans as possible. And I said that's exactly what I want to do with my life. And so then my first mentor also had me study the persecuted church a lot. And so you kind of combine those together of the Africa aspect and then studying the persecuted church in Africa. I was drawn to Sudan. And so I got involved there pretty quickly right away. And it took us about 3 years to find the partner that we would be with in the Evangelical Presbyterian Church in South Sudan. It's no affiliation to the EPC here.
Right.
But went there and really started to find a partner in EPC. And I remember being in the middle of the bush in South Sudan, and I'm talking with Elias Taban, who's the bishop there. And I said, okay, I want to tell you a story about George Mueller. And I told him about that, and I said, so I'm going to go back to the States, and I'm going to pray for 6 months, and you'll pray for 6 months, and we'll see if the Lord is in this. And at the time, I was on staff at a church in Midland, Texas, and completely unsolicited, over $186,000 came in to help build the first orphanage. And that kind of put us on our first path for starting out.
Yeah. Let me jump in real quickly. We have one of those mandatory breaks. We'll come back and pick up some of that. And we want to certainly talk about restore, rebuild, and renew. All of that you can find at hisvoiceglobal.com. And great story. And we'll continue talking with Vernon and Amber right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In a normal world, it would be newsworthy when the Attorney General of the United States gives an impassioned speech about religious liberty. But we don't live in that world, so the speech by William Barr has either been ignored or ridiculed. When he spoke at Notre Dame, he reminded the audience that the founders of this country had a supreme test as a free society. The test was whether the citizens in such a free society could maintain the moral discipline and virtue necessary for the survival of free institutions. He explained that failing that test would lead to one of two tyrannies. The citizens would either embark on an unbridled pursuit of personal appetites at the expense of common good, or else coercive government would step in to impose restraints. He then asked, what is the source of virtue and moral discipline that is necessary for self-government? Then he answered, it is religion. Religion helps teach, train, and habituate people to what is good. This comes in various forms, from formal religious training to informal rules like customs and traditions. That is the problem. Religion is not popular in our secular culture. In fact, it is very unpopular. Those who defy the secular creed of our day risk a figurative burning at the stake, social, educational, professional ostracism, and exclusion waged through the lawsuits and savage media campaigns. Each week on my radio program, we provide an ever-growing list of examples of hostility to religion, religious values, and religious people. Bakers, florists, printers, videographers, photographers, teachers, and students experience criticism and persecution. Now more than ever, we need to make the case for the positive value of religion in general and Christianity in particular in our society. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Vernon and Amber Burger with us today as we talk about His Voice Global. And Vernon, if nothing else, Elizabeth Elliot and George Mueller, those are pretty good role models to have in front of you.
Yeah.
But let's go back to that story for just a minute, because here you come back to Midland, Texas, which of course is where you're located now in case people want to contact you. And unsolicited, all sorts of funds come in. Tell us the rest of the story.
Yeah, so then we were able to start the first orphanage, and then basically over the course of time, we were able to start two schools, a primary school and secondary school, and then we transitioned from an orphanage setting to more orphan care, more of an orphan care network where it was more home-based. But then our kids got old enough after they went through secondary school, or high school as we know it here, and we started an education fund for them where they could either go to VOTEC or university. And so now we send them to either university or VOTEC down in Uganda. And we had our first college graduate last year, Asiki. We're super proud of him. He got a degree in business. We have another graduate, or a guy that Emmy, who will be graduating next year with his law degree. And then it's all over the map. I mean, some are plumbers, some are caterers, some are accountants. It really is this whole picture for us is how do you walk with these kids for a lifetime? And so our goal has been not just to see them graduate secondary school or even college, but how do you walk with them for a lifetime? And how how can us as an organization, can we see their kids and then their kids' kids and stuff? So that's been a lot of the story.
Amber, let me come to you for just a minute because I know you provide kind of logistical support, but I'd love to know your story and background as well.
Yeah, I grew up in a rural area in North Missouri and was raised for a while by a single mom. My father passed away, and she raised us, and then I got an amazing stepfather. But during that time, while I was being raised by a single mom, the church really stepped in and helped support her and showed us what it meant to be supported and loved, and just kind of brought our family into the church. And so as someone who has experienced the feeling of being alone and vulnerable as a orphaned child with just a mother, I just have always had a desire to notice and recognize and help those who are in that same scenario. And so as I grew up and I became a believer, and while I was in college, I just really felt like I was called to East Africa. I went to Uganda multiple times as a college student and just wanted to be there. And how the Lord brought Vernon and I together was through some mission projects we were doing in Houston, Texas, and our stories just lined up, and God just made that path for us. And we actually thought when we started His Voice Global that we would live in Sudan and do the work there. And just a lot of different things played into it. We actually had everything sold. We were moving to South Sudan. We had a son, and we were ready to move there. And the war re-broke out, and they closed the borders, and we were not allowed to go. So Vern went and alone and met with Bishop Elias Saban, and that is where God really kind of changed the vision of His Voice Global. Originally, we thought we were going to be on the ground. It was going to be this one orphanage, but then Bishop and Vern just really felt like the Lord was saying, we need to train and equip and restore and rebuild the communities that are full of vulnerable people, instead of us necessarily going in and being there and then being sent out every time there was war, that we would come in and train and equip and raise up the indigenous people to do the work. So they were already ready and willing and wanting. They had the vision, but we were just going to come alongside them and encourage them in it. And so that became our new role, to be here and then go there. And so it has looked different than I maybe dreamed as a college student. I thought we would live there and be in Africa forever. But, man, we have seen God just do so much more above we could ever imagine, having us be here and allowing and letting and encouraging the indigenous people to do the work.
Vernon, let me come back to that idea of restore, rebuild, and renew, because as people go to your website, to hisvoiceglobal.com, they'll see that. And talk a little bit more about how that strategy works out.
Yeah, thanks. So for us, Restore, Rebuild, Renew comes out in three ways. Number one, we talk about like a circle of care. So we want to approach people with physical, emotional, social, and spiritual. We believe there's all four components to a person. And so how do we holistically disciple somebody and walk with them for a lifetime? Then number two is that we believe in economic empowerment. We help to start businesses on the ground in these countries so that it can lead to what we call more as kingdom sustainment. Yes, we do want to see self-sustaining in country, but it's even bigger than that. We believe that God is renewing that sphere of business, and we want business people to be able to live for the kingdom in an incredible way like that. And then our third one is our theological training. We have module theological training that is multiplication driven. Our director of theological training, Daryl Parrish, has done a brilliant job in that, being able to see very practical training that's put in the hands of people, and then they go out and multiply it either in their country or beyond their country, and even in some of the hotspot areas, especially in northern Uganda, for sure.
Let's, if we can, just before we take a break, talk about ways people can get involved with you, because I know you have a couple of missionaries, but I know that we have a lot of individuals that maybe are at churches. They're looking maybe for a short-term mission project. I know a while back you actually had a Kenya trip last August. You might have some of those kinds of trips planned in the future. So if you have a college student listening who's thinking about short-term missions and getting involved with you, if we got somebody thinking about long-term missions, or if just a church would like to help in a rebuilding project, what's available for various individuals or churches?
Yeah, we have a lot available right now. We have a director of our teams. Her name is Danielle Kwok, and she organizes for us all of our trips. And so we will take 2 trips to Uganda and 2 trips to Kenya, possibly a 3rd trip coming up in this next year. And those will be live on our website really soon. But if someone is interested, they can email Danielle at hisvoiceglobal.com at any point, and she can put you on the list to be able to know when those trips are coming up. The Uganda trips, you interact with our college students. We will also go to refugee camp where we're helping with some vulnerable women and children there. And then the Kenya trips, we work with a partner church called Rift Valley Hope, and we come alongside them and we help the workers who are helping run our safe homes there. His Voice Global has safe homes there. We come alongside those workers and we support them for the week. They're great trips. There's a wonderful way to get involved. And we do all the training, His Voice Global, so you can be from anywhere and jump on a team. As for church involvement, we have a lot of things coming up. There's Giving Tuesdays coming up. That's the Tuesday following Thanksgiving. And we have a generous donor right now who's willing to match anything that comes in on Giving Tuesday and give their match towards our education fund. And so that's a really incredible way to be a part of what's going on. We also have, like you said, we have 3 families that live in northern Uganda, and we are not closed off to the idea to have to bring more missionaries on our staff. And so if people are interested, they could always reach out to us, Vernon at hisvoiceglobal.com or Amber at hisvoiceglobal.com, and we would love to start that conversation. We do take theological training teams, and that is in the kind of beginning stages of having people come alongside and train with us.
Sure.
And so if that really is your big interest, then just reach out to one of us and we'll get you connected.
Let's take a break, and we do have a link to your Facebook page, your Twitter account, and of course also a link to the website. And so let's take a break, and then we'll keep Vernon and Amber on for a little bit longer. Maybe you have a question or a comment. Maybe you've been thinking about serving in Africa. Maybe you have some questions about missions or something of that nature. Let's open up the phones, give you a chance to join the conversations. We'll keep them a little bit longer. 1-800-351-1212, His Voice Global, and then we'll probably get back into a little bit more of the news about the impeachment hearings. All that coming up right after this.
There's an old saying that the first casualty in war is truth. Maybe that helps you understand what's happening in America right now. Thankfully, it's not a war with bullets, but there is a war for control. Control of the country and control of your pocketbook. Truth is under fire, but you can help turn the tide by supporting Truth. Join the Truth Team at Point of View Radio. Learn how you can make a difference at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Don't let truth become a casualty on your watch. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
So what would you do with an extra $500 a month in your budget? Pay off loans, save it, do something fun? Well, it's something you may need to think about if you become a member of MediShare. MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry, and it works. You can save big time on your healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay for things you don't believe in either. Find out more. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40. 855-SHARE-40.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Vernon and Amber Burger with us, and we'll chat with them for a few more minutes. His Voice Global. So if you have a question about that, feel free to give us a call, and we'll get back into some of the impeachment proceedings taking place today. A little bit of fireworks between Adam Schiff and Devin Nunes. I'll talk about that. But Vernon and Amber, let me, for just a minute, maybe get a story or two from you. Next hour, we're going to have Doug Bender with us, and it is, again, the great stories that come out of I Am Second, and we're going to be talking about some of those incredible stories of conversion or discipleship that have happened to various individuals that they've put in that white chair, but as an individuals that have actually been involved in ministry in Africa. Can you maybe share a story or two of the impact that the gospel is already making in places like Sudan and Uganda and Kenya?
Yes, one example is that, in fact, I just got back from Uganda on Sunday, and so I was with our students, and one of our orphans, his name is Taban, and he was telling me that they were on this outreach the week before, and they were going around, and there was they came to this this hut, and there was this older man that was in there. He's 86 years old, and the 86-year-old man tells Taban, I had a dream that a young man was going to come to me last night, and you're standing here right now.
Wow.
And he said, Taban starts sharing Christ with him, and the man says, I haven't taken a bath in nearly 2 years. And Taban said he was just caked in all of this mud and all of these things and stuff. And Taban shares Christ with him. And then the man says, will you do me a favor? And this is like a 23-year-old college student. And he says, will you bathe me? And so Taban gets down and he bathes this man for the first time in nearly 2 years, gives him all the money that he has in his wallet, Taban does, and blesses this man. And Taban was sitting there telling us around a campfire, and he said, how great of a blessing is it that God would put me in that situation to be able to bathe this man? And it was just something where, whenever you start something, you have certain goals and certain visions, and we've always told these kids, we believe every nation is called to all nations. So it's not just that the South Sudanese are called to reach South Sudan, they're called to reach all nations. Same with Uganda, same with Kenya, same with the U.S. And so what would happen if every nation would actually believe that they're called to reach all nations? Then we'd act like one body of Jesus. And so you see these type of victories with these kids that are now men, and them being so humbled by being able to even bathe a 86-year-old man, So that was one that just came to mind from this last week for sure.
And I think it's a good illustration of the fact that if you really want to develop kind of a world vision and a vision for the Great Commission, one of the ways is to get people involved. And I've oftentimes said that may be the entry point. Yesterday, we have our millennial roundtable, and what I found is a lot of these millennials say, look, before I'm going to commit myself long term, I need to kind of just dip my toe in the water. And that's why I think these short-term mission trips can be so significant, because many of them, even if they've been in a Bible college and done evangelism, haven't seen that many people except the Lord. You send them to Africa, you send them to Asia, you send them just about anywhere in the world these days, apart from the United States or apart from Europe maybe, and they will see conversions and evangelistic response like they've never seen before, and that will really begin to encourage them and really light a fire in their heart, don't you think?
Yes, I think there's a lot of truth of it, of just this aspect that we tell people all the time that God's God's the same, right? Yesterday, today, and forever. So he's working in every place. The question is, to what degree are you going to have your eyes, ears, and hands tuned to the wounds of society? How are you going to be awake to the kingdom? And so, whenever we, even in people coming over in short-term teams, we tell them that we tell our students, our South Sudanese students, that we want them to pour into the U.S. people that are coming over as well, and they do. I mean, they do. They light some fires and stuff, and vice versa too. So it's a mutual aspect.
Let me come to Amber for just another minute or two, because one of the things we have on your website are current needs, 6 primary ministry needs: classrooms, retreat center, educational fund, which you mentioned, theological and disciple training, program execution, safe houses, and the rest. And so one more time, let's talk for just a few minutes about how people can be involved. Certainly prayer is key, and then to give and to go. Pray, give, and go. So talk about how people can help with the different needs that you have identified there at His Voice Global.
Yeah, so we've already talked about the education fund, and that's a big need right now because we have so many students in South Sudan still, in those upper grades about to come out into college. And so that's a big need. But also in Kenya, our kids are getting older. In Kenya, they have to pay as well for their high school because most of them go to these different high schools as they are accepted. And so there's some funding needs there. So the education fund. But also, we are currently in a really exciting time in Uganda because we are building out what we're calling a Rise Discipleship and Retreat Center. And this land is this beautiful land in northern Uganda. And the vision there is that this will be a place where those college students can call home when they're on break. It'll have they'll have dorms for them. They have their own gardens where they can raise money that they personally can have jobs within the property when they're on break so they can have money for themselves. And also it is going to be a retreat center for other organizations, other nonprofits and NGOs that work in East Africa to be able to retreat and get away. And so the funds that we put into that, they are going to multiply exponentially. There will be theological training that goes on there. And all kinds of different things. I mean, if you can dream of it, it can happen there because we're going to have buildings and facilities there. And so that is our big push for this coming year to get that funded. And also, we think that it's a great way that churches can get involved because ultimately there's going to be a plan where we have building. We need to raise this much for this building that will be a theological training building, this building that will be a dorm. And so groups of people can get behind and around raising money for, that particular building each phase. And so that's a really big one. Every nonprofit has organizational needs, just the undesignated funds that will help run the organization from the state side, as well as help our missionaries. And so that's always a way people can get involved. We would love to see our missionaries be taken care of in way of encouragement and love. And so if somebody has that encouragement gift and they want to send care packages or write notes, those go a long way to those people serving in Uganda. And so that's a great way people can get involved. Like we've already mentioned the teams. Teams are always a great way that you can see what's going on. Like you said, people like to experience it and see firsthand. And then you can come back and be an advocate for His Voice Global and advocate and let your friends and your circles know what's going on around. So those are a few of the big ticket items, I would say, coming into 2020 that were ways people can get involved.
Very good. And again, we have a link to your website and a place where people can contact you in case maybe they would like to have you come and speak to their missions group, or maybe they would like to know a little bit more about some of that. So if nothing else, I appreciate you certainly having the vision to actually move forward, and I appreciate both of you giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Yes.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I thought I'd just update you a little bit on the impeachment proceedings. We won't do a lot of that each day because, if frankly you watched some of it today, you've got to say some of it's kind of pretty boring. But there were a few sparks in the beginning between Adam Schiff and Devin Nunes, so I thought I'd just summarize a little of that real quickly, so that if you have not been paying attention, you know kind of how the markers are being set down on what is or is not going to take place next. And also, one of the things I thought I would provide for you after the break is just the list of individuals that Republicans have asked to be witnesses. And as far as I can tell, only one of those, maybe only one, is on the list. So it does seem like Democrats get their witnesses, Republicans don't. We'll talk about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again for a few more minutes, and then at the top of the next hour, Doug Bender will be with us. We'll talk about this new book just came out yesterday, I Choose Peace. It's really some of the testimonies of those individuals that have been part of I Am Second, and if you're not familiar with that, we'll get into that in more detail. In the next hour, also, we'll be talking with Robert Morris, Take the Day Off, and so I think you will really appreciate that as well. But we've had, of course, the first day of public hearings on the issue of impeachment. Adam Schiff, of course, is the head of the House Intelligence Committee and began by talking about the fact that Donald Trump was asking for a favor dealing with the investigations of Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. Yet, if you look at the transcript, you can see that the name Biden was not even brought up until about a page and a half later in the transcript. So when you try to conflate the word favor with the transcript itself, you don't have that happening. And I think originally the idea was that this would be some material surfaced by the whistleblower and then, of course, by somebody who testified today, William Taylor, and that there wasn't a transcript, so you'd have to accept their analysis of it. But Donald Trump maybe preempted some of that by making the transcript, or what some people call the summary, available, and you can read it for yourself and see that that isn't exactly the case. So that led to then the opening statement, not just by the House majority, but by the House minority, and so that was Representative Devin Nunes. And so he spent some time reminding everybody of the context here. And the first is that the actual testimony by Robert Mueller on the Mueller report took place on July 24th. The phone call to the president of Ukraine took place the next day, July 25th. And so he says here we had been hearing all this argument about Donald Trump as a Russian agent, and after 3 long years, then immediately pivoted and said, no, it's not the problem of Russia. It is the Republican dealing with Ukraine. And so in his opening statement, he made 5 points that we're asked to forget about the Democrats on this committee falsely claiming that they had more circumstantial evidence of collusion between President Trump and Russia. Number 2, that we're asked to forget about them reading fabrications of a Trump-Russia collusion from the Steele dossier, which, of course, was fabricated. Number 3, we're asked to forget about them trying to obtain pictures of Trump from Russian pranksters. Number 4, forget about the fact that they were leaking a false story to the CNN news organization. And number 5, we're simply supposed to forget about the countless other deceptions, large and small, about this. And so he was quite critical of even the reason we were having the hearings, based upon up until July 24th, it was all about Russia, Russia, Russia. Then right afterwards, July 25th, it was not Russia, it's Ukraine, and we're supposed to forget everything else. And so his argument that he's making, and I don't know him and we've not interviewed him, but I, reading between the lines, think that he's not even sure there'll be a vote on articles of impeachment. He believes this is part of, as he said in his opening statement today, a carefully orchestrated media smear campaign. And he gives a couple of reasons for that as well, because he says after vowing publicly that impeachment requires bipartisan support, Democrats are actually pushing forward impeachment without the backing of a single House Republican. Number 2, he says the witnesses deemed suitable for television by the Democrats were put through a closed-door audition process in what he called a cult-like atmosphere in the basement of the Capitol, in which there were then various leaks provided there. Number 3, violating their own guidelines, the Democrats repeatedly redacted from their transcripts the name of Alexandra Chalupa. You might say, well, who is she? Well, interesting enough, going to actually testify later next week, a contractor for the Democratic National Committee who worked with the Ukrainian officials originally to dig up dirt on the Trump campaign. Then number 4, Democrats rejected most of the Republicans' witness requests, resulting in a one-sided process. And if you're not familiar with that, it is interesting because Representative Jim Jordan created the list, put it out for people to see on Twitter, but of course that list is probably also now a public record. And that list includes Devin Archer, not called, Hunter Biden, so far not called, Alexandra Chalupa, yes, called. That one will come out next week. David Hunter, not called. Tim Morrison, not called. Nellie Orr, not called. Ambassador Volker looks like is going to call next week. So 2 of those, and then, of course, the whistleblower and all those sources. So very few on the list were called that Republicans wanted called. That's, of course, an issue that they have been raising. And then 2 more real quickly. The whistleblower, of course, acknowledged to have a bias against President Trump, and his attorney touted a coup against the president. That goes back to actual posting that happened just a few weeks after the election of Donald Trump. And then, of course, a prior hearing Democrats on the committee read out a purely fictitious, as he said, rendition of the president's phone call with President Zelensky. And if you think that it is actually accurate, then go back and look at that transcript or that summary, because you certainly don't find it there. So if nothing else, he went on to spend some time about how they have accused the Trump campaign of colluding with Russia until all of a sudden they weren't calling for that anymore, oftentimes citing that Steele dossier. And now they accuse President Trump of malfeasance in Ukraine when they themselves, he says, were culpable. The Democrats cooperated in a Ukrainian election meddling, and they defended Hunter Biden's securing of a paid position with a corrupt Ukrainian company, all while his father served as vice president. So then it came time to introduce the two individuals that testified today. And again, Devin Nunes wasn't holding back. He said, Ambassador Taylor and Mr. Kent, I'd like to welcome you here and congratulate you for passing the Democrats' Star Chamber auditions held for the last 6 weeks in the basement of the Capitol. It seems you agreed, either wittingly or unwittingly, to participate in a drama, but the main performance, the Russian hoax, has ended, and you've been cast in a low-rent Ukrainian sequel. So we'll see where this goes. As I pointed out, of course, today we've had a chance to hear from two individuals, William Taylor, who is one of the top envoys with Ukraine, and the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, George Kent. No testimony that, as far as I'm aware of, taking place tomorrow, but then there will be one on Friday. That is the former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. And then next week, on a Tuesday, Jennifer Williams, who is the aide to the vice president, will testify. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vidman, who we've talked about before, National Security Council Director for European Affairs, and Kurt Volker, former U.S. envoy to Ukraine. Wednesday, you'll have Gordon Sondland, who actually, in many cases, seems to have disagreed with the testimony by William Taylor, so you see where that goes. Laura Cooper, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, David Hale, Undersecretary of State, and then Thursday of next week, Fiona Hill, a former National Security Director for Europe and Russia. So we'll kind of follow this from time to time, but again, if you found even my summary here a little bit boring, believe me, that's a whole lot more interesting than some of the testimony that's been taking place. I don't think it's going to be that riveting to the American people, but we will see. And the bigger issue is there will be some people that have been watching that today and will be watching it over the next week. Most people will get their analysis from various news outfits, and we'll see whether or not that moves the needle at all on the issue of impeachment. I suspect that it won't, but you never know, because that's why, indeed, those testimonies are important. But when we come back, we're going to talk about two books, one that has just come out, I Choose Peace. It is written by Doug Bender, and if you've been listening to this program any length of time, you know that over the years we've talked about the I Am Second program. We've had Brian Welch on this program. We've had Dave Sterrett on the program when he had a book about the I Am Second, and so we'll talk with him. And then a little bit later, Robert Morris, founding pastor of Gateway, will be with us as well. So we have a lot to cover in the next hour, and we'll do that right after these important messages.
So when people first hear about Metashare, they have questions. Some good ones, like, what is it? Well, Metashare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry. It's not health insurance. It's a different way of doing things, which leads us to this question. Why do so many become Metashare members? Two big reasons. They save a lot. The typical family saves $500 a month, and they feel great about it. With Metashare, you aren't forced to pay for things you don't believe in. Find out more. 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40.
It seems we can't get through a day without hearing how science has been corrupted to support political goals. Media entities have sold out truth for the sake of favored narratives. Even some religious groups have abandoned the Bible to support things based on feelings. So who can you trust? Kerby Anderson and the Point of View Truth Team are your source for real news. Learn how you can make a difference by joining the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. In a world of unending fog, Point of View is a shining light. Do your part at pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend some time in the first half hour talking about I Am Second. And I remember when I first started doing some of these interviews and I would travel to places outside of Dallas, people say, well, I've never heard of it because it was really focused originally in Dallas, but I can't imagine you don't know about it now. If you don't, you will shortly, because I remember back in the old days, this is 3 studios away, when there had been an interview they did with Brian Head Welch. We had him in studio, and not too often you have somebody from Korn in the studio talking about that, but it had a credible testimony. Since then, of course, we've interviewed lots of individuals, many of whom are in this new book coming out on the subject of I Choose Peace. I remember when we had Dave Starrett in studio with us as we talked about that earlier book, which I guess you were co-author with. Doug Bender is with us today. And I might just mention that he is the author of I Am Second, Real Stories, as well as Changing Lives, Live Second, as well as this one that has just come out. It was actually released yesterday, I Choose Peace, Raw Stories of Real People Finding Contentment and Happiness. He is with E3. As a matter of fact, I was in a meeting just the other day, and we had Norm Miller and we had Curtis Hale. You know both of those individuals.
I certainly do.
And they were both very instrumental in some of this as well.
They certainly
so we'll
were.
talk about that in just a minute. And, of course, you've been involved as a church planner, a graduate of Liberty University and Dallas Theological Seminary, and in studio with us. So, if nothing else, Doug, thank you for joining us today. And certainly, if nothing else, this book is going to have an impact because for years, people have been able to watch these incredible testimonies, people sitting in this white chair telling their story. And that's really what I Am Second's all about, right?
It certainly is. We've been telling the stories of people's lives change when they found Jesus, or really when Jesus found them, for many years now. And it has been an amazing journey to see people react and see their own lives in the lives of these people that we're telling their stories of.
And I might just mention that I think a lot of people are going to get this book because, first of all, it has the testimony. I'll just give a few because there's so many of Kathy Lee Gifford and Chip and Joanna Gaines, Phil and Kayla Robertson, for example, Eric Metaxas. Of course, I remember when he was actually being filmed because he was at the Hope Center there. I saw him. Albert Pujols, R.A. Dickey, some of the people in the sports area. Lauren Scruggs Kennedy. Of course, I mentioned Brian Head Welch, as well as a number of other individuals, some of whom you may know, others that you've heard about, even, for example, the owner of In-N-Out Burger. But I thought in some respects we'd start with the back and move forward because the very last chapter is you, and it's entitled Peace When We Lost Hope. Now, the title of this is I Choose Peace, and so if you don't mind, I'll take you through a very difficult circumstance in your life that is your testimony, which I thought was so appreciative of the fact that they put it in the book. So talk about that.
Yeah, it's funny with my own journey here really started when I was putting out my last book. It was due to the publisher by the end of the day, and my wife had a appointment at the stenographers. And I told her, I said, I can't make it. I literally have a book due to the publisher today.
We all know about that. I've done a few of those.
Yep. And so I couldn't push that appointment, and she couldn't push hers, so she went. And I still had a couple chapters where I still was doing some edits when I got a call. And the call was from her, and she said, the doctor tells us that the baby is uncompatible with life.
Yes. 0%.
0% chance of survival.
Wow.
And, well, I sent off the book right there. I wasn't done editing. There's still a couple chapters that are missing some commas, I'm sure. But I left, and I picked them up, my wife and our 3-year-old at the time, and they were walking back home. I found them on the side of the sidewalk, walking home, and we kind of ended a whole new chapter in our life.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's the idea of peace, because as you read through this book, which is available now in hardback, just came out, and you may be able to find it in your local bookstore, but it's just out. So again, it's Thomas Nelson. We have a link so you can get it in hardback or Kindle. And every one of these are powerful stories, but yours is pretty powerful as well. People might say, well, I know Kathy Lee Gifford, or, I know all sorts of the Robertsons, and I know some of these baseball players and these pitchers and hitters and all that. They don't know you, but it's a story that anybody that's ever lost a child can relate to. And that's why you put it in there.
And we were surprised when we went through this process with first a miscarriage, and then this ended up being a stillbirth, so it was much further along in the pregnancy.
Right.
We were surprised to find out that 20% of all pregnancies can end this way.
Yes.
And I didn't realize that the club was that big.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps that's why God lets us go through some of these stories, some of these journeys, is because it lets us relate to those who perhaps don't have the faith background to rely on when bad things happen. And that's what we wanted to share in this book is, you can have peace. Life doesn't work out all the time. Bad things happen, and they happen to good people and bad people alike. But God is there, and you can still choose Him. And when you choose Him, you can choose peace.
Yeah. And by the way, if you read through this book, if you're expecting it all just happily ever after, I mean, Lauren Scruggs is a good example, gets a trip on an airplane and then just gets hit in the face with a propeller and disfigured. I mean, these are incredible stories, but staying on yours for just another minute or two, as you know, of course, you were at Dallas Theological Seminary. They sometimes let me teach there as well. And what was so intriguing to me is when I published a book years ago on genetic engineering, I thought there'd be all sorts of questions about genetics. No, all the questions had to do with artificial insemination, test tube babies, and the rest, because I began to get calls from the modern day Hannahs who actually were either infertile or had lost a child, just as you and your wife had. And it just sensitized me to an issue that up until that time the church wasn't speaking to. And so when I used to teach occasionally in the pastoral ministries program, I would just simply say, you're going to be a pastor, and I want you to recognize when you look out in front of that congregation, when you're preaching, either as a associate pastor or as a senior pastor, there are a good number of couples that are infertile. There are a good number of couples there that have lost a child.
Exactly.
There are a good number of women that have got abortions. That's real life.
That's
and
real life.
Nothing else. I appreciate the fact that I Am Second doesn't sugarcoat anything. You tell some incredible stories.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. We tell a lot of stories, and some of them have the happy ending, and some of them don't. Some of them have the rough moments, and sometimes we'll tell a story, and the person is still in the middle of it.
Right.
The ending isn't even there yet.
Yes.
And they just tell, hey, this is where I'm at right now. I'm struggling. I'm fighting. But you know what? I have Jesus in that fight. One of my favorite stories is a guy named Austin Carlisle, a singer from Of Mice and Men. Fantastic story. He walked into our interview having just lost everything he owned. He told us, he goes, I own 3 suitcases worth of stuff right now. My health is bad. I own nothing. He goes, and you know what? I have never had more peace.
More peace. Which is, again, the theme of the book. Let me just mention real quickly that the book is now out. If you go to your bookstore today, they might say, we've ordered it, we're waiting for it. Over 200 pages. And I might just mention that there are 16 chapters. When we come back, I thought I'd just highlight 2 or 3, maybe some of your favorites, some of my favorites, and just really focusing on the idea of finding peace in love and loss, which we just talked about, finding peace in identity and purpose, and then finding peace in difficulty and disappointment. And again, 16 chapters, just a book that I think you'll want to get. You may even want to give it as a Christmas present, but we'll come back and continue our conversation with Doug Bender right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In a normal world, it would be newsworthy when the Attorney General of the United States gives an impassioned speech about religious liberty. But we don't live in that world, so the speech by William Barr has either been ignored or ridiculed. When he spoke at Notre Dame, he reminded the audience that the founders of this country had a supreme test as a free society. The test was whether the citizens in such a free society could maintain the moral discipline and virtue necessary for the survival of free institutions. He explained that failing that test would lead to one of two tyrannies. The citizens would either embark on an unbridled pursuit of personal appetites at the expense of common good, or else coercive government would step in to impose restraints. He then asked, what is the source of virtue and moral discipline that is necessary for self-government? Then he answered, it is religion. Religion helps teach, train, and habituate people to what is good. This comes in various forms, from formal religious training to informal rules like customs and traditions. That is the problem. Religion is not popular in our secular culture. In fact, it is very unpopular. Those who defy the secular creed of our day risk a figurative burning at the stake, social, educational, professional ostracism, and exclusion waged through the lawsuits and savage media campaigns. Each week on my radio program, we provide an ever-growing list of examples of hostility to religion, religious values, and religious people. Bakers, florists, printers, videographers, photographers, teachers, and students experience criticism and persecution. Now more than ever, we need to make the case for the positive value of religion in general and Christianity in particular in our society. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
New book just came out, I Choose Peace, and I think you will really enjoy it. As I said, 16 different chapters, of course, 16 different testimonies, which are just a tip of the iceberg. I can think of all sorts of individuals that I've watched over the years, and I am second that are not in this book. But these are very good and representative and would be great encouragement material on, first of all, finding peace in love and loss, then finding peace in identity and purpose, and then finding peace in difficulty and disappointment. I found, interestingly enough, Doug, that this is a book, or even these testimonies, are just great conversation starters with your non-Christian friends.
Exactly.
If you're looking for an opportunity to maybe hand a book to somebody and say, well, why don't you read one of those, and they might be interested in athletics. So you got cyclists and pitchers and hitters. They might be in music, and so they might know some of the entertainers. They might watch the Olympics, and so they have an Olympic individual there. They might be in the business world, and they are familiar with something like In and Out Business, or maybe they watch television, Fixer Upper, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You're going to find somebody that's connected with some, if not all, of these stories. And what a great conversation starter. So
yeah, that
share
was
with
one of the things
others.
we've always wanted to do from the beginning.
Yes.
We wanted to create something that, yes, would bless Christians, but would be something that is safe to share with your unchurched friends. It's not going to we're not going to use terminology that's going to confuse people, and the stories are going to be from folks that they recognize and have something in common with.
Yes, and again, some of them are politicians, some of them are pastors. It's just all over the map. But pick out one or two that you find interesting, because I certainly have found many of these interesting. But I'd love to see, since you have had a chance to edit all those, and hopefully get all the comments and the commas in the right place.
That's right.
What did you pick?
One of my favorites is with Lindsay Snyder. She is the owner-operator of In-N-Out Burger.
Yes.
Many of us have had her burgers, but what many people don't know is her journey with God, and that she's, first off, a Christian, which she doesn't share a lot of interviews with folks. She's a pretty quiet person in public, but her story is a really remarkable one. She's incredibly successful, but she grew up feeling quite the opposite and quite the failure.
Mm-hmm.
She felt the black sheep in the family.
Divorces.
Many divorces, troubled
what a mess.
relationships, a real mess. And her journey with God was really a realization that, I mean, maybe this sounds too simple, but that God forgives.
Mm-hmm.
That you can make a complete mess of your life, and God doesn't leave you for that. He still loves you. And that's something that I think her story speaks into, and it's incredibly powerful and important for people to realize you're not too far gone. Nobody is.
Yeah, and so great story there. Of course, we mentioned Eric Metaxas. You saw him yesterday. We've had him in studio here. I just interviewed him about a week or two ago by phone, but I know that he was doing that because I happened to walk past him when he was going to actually do that day and sit in that infamous or famous white chair. It's not something everybody can sit in anymore, I guess. It's getting kind of worn down.
Yes, yes. A lot of people have sat in that chair.
But talk about that, because people look at Eric Metaxas and go, well, okay, there's a successful individual. He's written all these children's books. And then I remember the first time I met him, he was just getting started writing some adult books, but he hadn't even written Wilberforce or any of those books, any of the biographies, all the way up to Luther.
Yeah.
And so in some respects, you might say, well, he had it all together. Not necessarily.
We think of that when we see successful people. We think they've always been successful and their personal lives are always successful. But, he grew up really struggling with what he wanted to do with his life, or what he could do with his life. He knew he wanted to write, but he found his first job doing copywriting for a industrial business.
I know.
And the most boring writing you can do. I mean, he's writing manuals.
Yes.
This is not kind of what someone goes to school to do typically, but that's where he found himself. And it's like God knew that he needed to first get right with him. And then he had this beautiful, amazing, successful life ahead. But I think sometimes God just knows that if you don't get right with me now, if I give you success, you'll forget me.
Yeah.
And so that's the path he put Eric on. And it was an incredible story. And it actually came through a dream. He really, a very miraculous story of him meeting God in a dream.
Yes. But again, a good example of faithful in small things, then given opportunity to be faithful in larger things. And just a great story there. Again, Eric would be saying, wait a minute, there's more to the story. Yes, there is. That's why I want you to read the book. But let's pick out another one, because we've over the years gotten to know Phil and Kay Robertson pretty well. And as people may know, they may know that Phil Robertson was an outstanding quarterback, but then stepped down and let this little-known guy actually take over for him, who ended up being a very good NFL quarterback. What I did not know until I read this is that he actually was called to actually play in the NFL. But nevertheless, that is an incredible story as well, and it really relates to the whole idea of family, because I think some people in A&E, when they got Duck Dynasty, they thought that this would be something that people would just laugh at, because these are such weird people that everybody's just going to make fun of them. And instead, this thing took off because, the beards were a little bit off-putting at first if you weren't used to them. But there was this core of faith and family that resonated with the American people. And that's really kind of what he's writing about here.
Yeah. And again, it's one of those stories. That's not where they began. When they began, his family life was a disaster. He actually walked out on Miss K, as she's known.
Yes.
And left his boys, and he was a drunk. He was just a disaster. And God really had to get a hold of him. And we kind of tell that story. And I love how he describes that journey, and also I share a lot about the story from his wife's perspective, hearing her side of the story, and it's fascinating because she actually became a believer before him.
Yes.
And she is in many ways has been the core of that family's faith journey. And that kind of set the whole thing in process. But a really beautiful story. And you get to see what's behind the TV story, what's behind that the version that we've always heard about, but you get to hear where it began and how their journey with God has brought them.
Well, again, there are chapters in here dealing with the whole question of pain, of beauty, of success, of failure, of shame, the desire to be perfect, just all sorts of different issues that kind of surface. So talk about for just a few minutes how people can use this book, because we sort of alluded to that, but I know the vision that you have had and the vision that at E3 Ministries and I Am Second have is that this could just be really a great conversation starter. And sometimes it is so difficult when you're doing evangelism to move from what happened on the NFL last week to the weather, to the question of the gospel. So it does seem to me that there are some really important issues that need to be addressed. And these stories, every single one of them, provide, if you will, a launching point for the gospel, don't they?
And that's exactly right. Because, of course, these stories are going to bless you if you're a believer and you're seeking for more peace in your life or purpose or identity. But this book and our films on our website, they're all designed to not just be a blessing to you, but be something that you can share with others. It's a conversation starter. In fact, when we sell our T-shirts, we have I Am Second T-shirts. We actually put a label on all our gear. And the label says, "Caution will spark conversation."
Yes, that's very good.
And that's because it's something. It's not just a marketing thing we're doing. This actually happens when you walk around and you share an I Am Second video, an I Am Second book. Something called I Choose Peace. It just makes people curious. And that sense of curiosity has been something we have been working to help people produce in their lives. And so, yes, it's very much a tool to engage people.
Let's mention, too, that we do have iamsecond.com on there. And so there is where you can see the films. There's the store you mentioned, because we all have at one time or another worn some T-shirts or seen people wearing T-shirts that say I Am Second. And it is a conversation starter, I'll guarantee. So what will people find when they land on the website?
Oh, they'll find a whole lot of stories. We actually have 140 stories on our website. People from all walks of life, famous people, regular people, sports, entertainment, politics, people telling their journey. So, of course, you're going to have T-shirts and gear you can get with that, but the core of it all is those stories. We have a blog that kind of tells more stories every week. So it's just full of great conversation-starting stories.
And I might just mention that once you start watching one of the stories, if you're one of those binge watchers, you might be in front of a computer for a long time because each story leads to another one. But if you want the book, again, I Choose Peace. It just came out yesterday. It should show up in the local bookstore, but if not, we have links to it to I Am Second, also links so that if you want to get it in hardback and Kindle, it's available. I think it'd be just a great thing to give to people at Christmas, especially even your unsaved friends. They might say, well, where did you find this? This is really interesting. What about this? And immediately you have a conversation about evangelism. So great. Doug Bender, thank you for all the work that you've done all these years and all these different books. And it was great to have you in studio with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's take a break. And when we come back, Robert Morris will be with us. We'll talk about his new book, Take the Day Off. And, of course, as I've mentioned before, we're in the midst of the impeachment proceedings. We'll talk more about that tomorrow and certainly on Friday in our weekend edition. We'll be back right after this.
There's an old saying that the first casualty in war is truth. Maybe that helps you understand what's happening in America right now. Thankfully, it's not a war with bullets, but there is a war for control. Control of the country and control of your pocketbook. Truth is under fire, but you can help turn the tide by supporting Truth. Join the Truth team at Point of View Radio. Learn how you can make a difference at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Don't let truth become a casualty on your watch. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
So what would you do with an extra $500 a month in your budget? Pay off loans, save it, do something fun? Well, it's something you may need to think about if you become a member of MetaShare MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry, and it works. You can save big time on your healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay for things you don't believe in either. Find out more. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40. 855-SHARE-40.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. Let's, if we can, for just a minute, talk about the fact that we live in this fast-paced, frenetic lifestyle, 24/7 news cycle. And if there's ever been a need for us to begin to really think about a day of rest, about a sabbatical, about a Sabbath day, all sorts of issues. That's certainly what we're going to try to get into now. And this new book, which I think you're really going to enjoy, Take the Day Off, written by Robert Morris and a foreword by Max Lucado. Fascinating book, by the way. He, of course, is the founding lead senior pastor at Gateway Church, an individual that has all sorts of different satellite campuses as well. Heard each week on over 600 radio stations, a nationally televised television program throughout the United States, 27 foreign countries. Also serves as the Chancellor of King's University and, most importantly, author of a number of books, Blessed Life, Frequency Beyond Blessed, and this newest book, Take the Day Off. Robert Morris, welcome to Point of View.
Hey, Kirby, it's great to be with you.
Let's talk about your health for just a minute. I know our listeners have been aware of some of the health scare that you've had. I know that many of our listeners have been praying for you and wondered exactly how you're feeling right now.
I am feeling great right now, thanks to the prayers of your listeners and other people. About a year and a half ago, I was getting ready to watch the Masters golf tournament, which is obviously a spiritual experience that God gave us on this earth. And I started feeling dizzy and faint, and I was losing blood, bleeding internally. Long story short, care flight into the hospital, had lost over 50% of my blood, had 2 torn arteries, and they repaired them. It took about a 4-month process to build my blood back up, but I'm doing great. And here's the amazing thing. They said the doctor said there's no medical reason this happened, and there's no medical reason you're still alive.
I know.
So I thank the medical professionals, but I also thank the people who prayed for me.
Well, when those prayer requests came out, I mean, I was like, I don't know if he's going to make it. And I guess the doctors are thinking the same thing, because what do I know about medicine? But if they were saying it, we were all thinking the same thing. So we are just thrilled that you are with us on this planet, and most importantly, thrilled that you have put this book together. Max Lucado is somebody in studio with us quite often, and he wrote a very good foreword to that. But I thought we might just get into how you came to write this book. In some respects, I think there is maybe a little bit of a connection between what you just shared and what's in the book. Is there?
There really is, but it started back in 2005 when God started dealing with me about resting one day a week.
Yes.
And I call it the great underwear crisis of 2005.
I wasn't sure if you're going to go into that, so tell that story, because that is so funny. I started laughing out loud, and that's on just even in the introduction. Go to it.
Yeah, so I'd been going like all of us, sometimes 3-4 weeks in a row without taking a day off. And I was getting dressed to go to the office, opened my underwear drawer, only 1 pair left, and I felt emotional. I felt like I was about to cry. And then I couldn't think. What am I going to wear tomorrow? Pastors should wear underwear, I mean, what am I going to do? I couldn't think that I could wash. I couldn't think that I could go to Walmart and buy 12 pair for 97 cents. I couldn't think any of that. So anyway, I put my underwear on, opened my sock drawer, no socks. I started crying. Sat down in my closet and started crying. So I said to my friend at lunch, I think I'm losing my mind. I cried over socks.
Yeah.
And he said, you're not losing your mind, you're just tired. And I've actually learned since then there's a difference between being tired and depleted. Tired, you can take a nap or get a good night's sleep, but when you're depleted, you have to replenish. You have to do something to fill yourself back up. And I think that was God's purpose in giving us a day off out of 7 every week.
And if I could jump ahead for just a minute, because I think it illustrates this, what you call the 4 tanks. I heard years ago another pastor talking about the fact that he paid attention to the spiritual tank, because he called it gauge, but whether you want to talk about a spiritual gauge or a tank, he certainly tried to practice some of the spiritual disciplines. And physical tank or physical gauge, that was important too. He recognized that it was important for him to eat right. He said I lots of times would eat squirrel food, as he called it. But he said there was another gauge on his panel, or you call it tank, and it's the emotional tank and the mental tank. And I think there is a sense in which sometimes we take care of, if we're Christians, the spiritual. We try to take care of the physical, especially if we have spouses that tell us to do it right or doctors that tell us to do it right. But it's easy to get so involved in this busy, fast-paced, frenetic lifestyle that we don't pay attention to the mental and the emotional tank, and that's what actually started affecting you, isn't it?
It is. Those are the two. Remember, I got sad over underwear and started crying over socks, and I couldn't think about how I could replenish my sock drawer, which is pretty basic thought to have, And so what I realized is when you can't make decisions and when you're tired in a meeting and you can't be creative the way God intended us to be, you've got to replenish that. And then your emotions, you get frustrated at your spouse easier, and you fly off the handle, or I mean, there are all sorts of warning signs. But again, it goes back to that God has a top 10 list. If you think about that, a top 10 list, and right up there with not lying, not stealing, not committing adultery, even not murdering, he puts resting one day a week.
And again, then Jesus in the New Testament, I love how you put it from the New Living Translation, Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people and not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath, because by the time Jesus shows up, there were all sorts of rules, regulations, commandments, but also additional interpretations of that Sabbath. I know you've traveled to Israel. I have as well. And sometimes you want to make sure that on the Sabbath you don't get in the Sabbath elevator, because the argument is you can't even push the button because it'll just go to the top floor and then stop at every floor all the way down. Sometimes what Jesus was speaking against is trying to make that a legalistic idea. But the principle is something that even in this age of grace we need to apply, isn't it?
It is. And I'll tell you, just as foolish as it is to walk up the stairs, and that would be less work than, taking the elevator. The other foolish thing we Christians have added is actually, when you go back and read the fourth commandment, it's the longest commandment of the 10, but there's nothing in it. This might even shock you, Kirby. There's nothing in it about going to church. Not one word about going to church. Now, I believe you should go to church. I'm a pastor. But I don't think that's what God intended about the Sabbath. The whole thing is about cease from labor. That's what the word Sabbath means. Stop working. And so people will ask me all the time, what do you do on your Sabbath? And I say, that's the wrong question. The question is actually, what do I not do on my Sabbath? And I don't do anything related to my job. And that's when my mind and my emotions, my body, and even my spiritual walk can get refreshed and replenished.
And some people have said it's like resharpening your axe when you're chopping wood. You've heard the story before of two men that were chopping wood, and one guy kept taking a break, and at the end of the day, the guy that was chopping all day had less wood chopped than the one that was taking a break. And he said, why is it you were able to chop more wood than I was? And he said, because during the breaks, I was sharpening my axe. And if you talk to people that are very creative, they will tell you that some of the times the most creative things that have come in their lives happen when their mind was on neutral, when they were shaving for a man or putting on makeup for a woman, or when they were driving, or when they were in a shower. And so there isn't just the physical rest that we need. It's also just the mental break that allows us to be creative, because after all, we're created in God's image, and we need to use that particular part of our giftedness as well, don't we?
We absolutely do. And people, again, will ask me too, well, what is, with my schedule, maybe you can do it because you have this and you don't understand. But again, I go back to the top 10 commandments that God's ways work. And those are actually principles for a better relationship with God and a better relationship with others. They're also principles even for a peaceful society. I mean, they're principles that are all through the Scripture. And so it's not just part of the Old Testament law. Those are principles that if we live by them, we're blessed, we're healthier, we're happier. If we don't, there are consequences. If we lie or steal, there are consequences. But those top 10 aren't just for a CEO or a firefighter or a teacher or a nurse or a stay-at-home mom or dad. They're for everyone. And I really encourage people, just try them, because God's ways work, and this is one of those 10.
Let's take a break, and we'll continue our conversation with Robert Morris for a few more minutes. We have a link to takethedayoffbook.com. You don't have to remember all that. We have a link there as well. And the book is now out, and I thought it would be great for you to hear about it. It's in hardback and Kindle, and so we have a link there as well. And of course, you can find out more about that. And we come back, we'll talk about this idea of the getaway and what this looks like a little bit more in terms of making sure the main thing is the main thing. What are some of our top priorities? We'll get into just a couple of more very quick comments about this. It is a book that has over 200 pages, so we're just giving you kind of a brief overview, but it's a book that you'll certainly want to get a copy of, and most importantly, apply to your life. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us for a few more minutes Robert Morris. Might just mention again that forward by Max Lucado and just a number of really profound and interesting and very practical chapters in this book, 10 different chapters dealing with this issue of take the day off, receiving God's gift of rest. And so, Robert, for just a few more minutes, we've been talking about trying to have a day of rest each week. And that's going to be hard for people to schedule, but they have to be intentional about it. But Chapter 6 then takes it one step further, and that is the idea of having a sabbatical. Now, those of us that have taught at a seminary or Bible college, we're familiar with some people taking a sabbatical. I don't think I ever have, but I understand that concept. But certainly there is the institutional sabbatical, but there's also just the sabbatical of wanting to get closer to God. And you have lots of very practical suggestions, 18 different keys for a sabbatical that will be successful. Now, we don't need to go through all 18, but give us an overview of what that might entail as well.
Well, I think when you think about, like you're saying, there are the times when we want to get away and draw closer to God, and you see Jesus doing it constantly.
Yes.
I mean, they say he often withdrew to spend time with the Father. And so what I do sometimes, and we've got business leaders in our church that do this, and they'll just get away for a few days maybe, and no television, no internet, turn the phone off except for your spouse, obviously, but just get away. We've been talking about fasting, if you want to take some time for fasting, to avoid outside influences, newspapers, all that, and just take your Bible and and some worship CDs or something, and just spend some time with the Lord. It is amazing what our business leaders, I'm not talking about pastors now, I'm talking about business leaders say. They come back so refreshed, so energized, and they're more in love with the Lord, more in love with their families, and more in love with what God has called them to do and why God's called them to do it.
Yes. And you mentioned Bill Gates and some of those, but another thing that you talk about is Stephen Covey's book, First Things First, because that gets back to the issue of priorities. And it does seem to me that we so often suffer from the tyranny of the urgent, and we sometimes set aside that which is important. And so it is back to this key issue that you talk about, and that is the need for us to be intentional about what we're going to do, and also intentional about what we're not going to do.
Yeah, and I've got the most practical way in the world to be able to do this and be intentional about it, and that is schedule it. If you think about it, we schedule, if we have a doctor's appointment, we schedule it. We schedule lunch with a friend. We schedule a business appointment. We schedule all these different things, and we don't schedule rest. And the problem is then that something else gets scheduled. Something takes that place. And what's wonderful is that sometimes someone will call my office and say, "Can Pastor Robert come speak?" And those that work with me can say, "No, he's already scheduled that day." And I'm scheduled to rest. And that's exactly, I learned this from another pastor. I was saying, "Hey, what about lunch? Monday, no, I'm out of town. Tuesday, I've got meetings. Wednesday, no, I've got something." I said, "What about Thursday?" I said, "What do you have scheduled Thursday?" He said, "Nothing." I said, "Great, let's have lunch." He said, "No, you misunderstood me." He said, "I have nothing scheduled on Thursday. Thursday, I'm scheduled to do nothing." And I'm telling you, when you schedule it, it works.
Wow. Let's, if we can, talk about ways in which people can participate. First of all, we have a link to takethedayoffbook.com, so people can actually download chapters 1 and 2 and have a chance to see that. One of the things, Robert, we always do is encourage people to watch a video, and you've got kind of a 1-minute video there, which is on YouTube, but then they can click on the button, put it on their Facebook page or Twitter page, or start a conversation about that as well. So that is a way that people can participate. But if we also talk about how people can use this book. Obviously, a lot of us will sit down and read the book individually, but I would love to have some of our listeners out here who are the head of a Sunday school class, a Bible fellowship, a small group, to maybe talk about this or teach through this. And what do you think about this? Maybe you've already taught sermons and had material on that for even the pastors to address some of that from the pulpit. So what's available for individuals that want to take this and pass this on to their congregation?
Well, exactly what you said. We've had lots of small groups doing it. If we haven't developed it yet, which I think we have, a study guide, I know it's in the works or it's being developed for small groups. Pastors can go through it. Churches can go through it. And again, as you say, there's so much in the book. You know, I even talk about the medical side of this, how they've researched it. There was a guy in Japan that they found dead at his desk. They went back at HR. The guy had worked an average of 110 hours a week.
Wow.
That's like 16-hour days, 7 days a week. But here's the shocking thing. He was 34 years old. 34. So they actually had to come up with a new word in the Japanese language for working yourself to death prematurely. So it's an epidemic. We're the most stressed out, medicated society that's ever lived. And I think God knew this years and years ago, thousands of years ago, and he came up with the solution. It's a benefit. It's a blessing to us. It's not a punishment to take a day off, but we do have to trust that if we do take a day off, God will provide for us, just like He provided manna for 2 days on the 6th day, so they didn't have to gather it on the 7th day. And we do have a study guide available for it.
And I might just mention, too, that you mentioned some other books that I think very highly of. One of those is by Richard Swenson, who's been on the program Margin, and what it's like to have a marginless living. And you talk about boundaries. We, of course, had both Henry Cloud and John Townsend on this program. And so these are some other books as well that also, in different ways, address this issue. So you provide us with some of the medical reasons for that, certainly the theological and spiritual reasons for that as well, but also just a sheer practical way about going about this idea of a Sabbath rest. So I just appreciate you writing the book, Take the Day Off, and if nothing else, I think we can all learn from your vicarious lessons. And next time we come to the sock door or the underwear door and it's empty, I recognize that that's just one more illustration of why we should make sure that we are allowing ourselves some time of rest so that we can get everything that happens in our life in perspective. So, Robert Morris, it's been great to have you on the program, and thank you for joining us today, and thank you for writing the book.
Hey, Kerby, thank you. It is always a joy to talk to you, and I just want you to know I really, really appreciate what you do for the body of Christ, and I hope everybody listens to you.
Well, that is very nice of you. Again, Robert Morris, founding lead senior pastor at Gateway Church. The book is entitled Take the Day Off. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore because its release date was just about a week or two ago, so it should be there. But if not, we have links for you to be able to find it. And I think you will enjoy not only the 10 chapters by Robert Morris, but even the foreword by Max Lucado, which I thought was interesting because I noticed that he actually copyrighted that because it is in typical Max Lucado style is just full of great encouragement and information as well. So again, one last time, just thought I'd mention the book, and it is entitled Take the Day Off. Of course, we earlier this hour talked about I Choose Peace, which is tied to I Am Second. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to know a little bit more about some of these books, some of the articles that you've posted, some of the interviews you've done, it is all available at our website, pointofview.net. And my commentary today is about this very excellent message and speech given by the Attorney General Bill Barr at Notre Dame on religious liberty. So you may want to watch and that as well and read some of that material. So it's all available at the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew for his help behind the scenes. Steve, thank you for producing the program. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover, and we will see you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
When you give to Point of View, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dies would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kerby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penn Dexter and Kerby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.